righty. I think we have almost everyone is here, so we're going to go ahead and start. We apologize for any technical issues that we've had. They've been resolved and we're ready to begin. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar. It's promoting alternative transportation during a pandemic. My name is Emily Cass. I am the Chesapeake chapter president. And before we get started, of course, we have a couple of announcements. I'm sure you've seen the emails flying around. Our chapter award nominations have been sent out and they are due on October 16th. There's also a link on our webpage for that. And we do have upcoming elections. The nominations are going to go out. The call for nominations are going to go out and they're going to be due on October 16th. And the voting period from that will be October 23rd through November 6th. And then in November, we're actually going to have a member celebration. We're not sure if we're doing it probably virtual at this time, but we will announce all of the award winners and the new board for 2021. So with the new board elections, I do encourage everyone to nominate themselves or someone they know. We're always looking for great volunteers for all the positions they're available. And we do have committee positions as well. The last thing I have is, I think you've seen the emails from National about ACT Connect, and it's a new platform that provides ACT members a place to discuss ideas and share resources. And we are going to be launching the Chesapeake chapter group on October 1st. So we'll send out an email to remind you to join that group, and it'll be a good way for our members to kind of connect with each other and to share ideas across the states on what's going on and what's working for each other. Before we get started, Holly, our membership chair, I think you wanted to say a few things.
I did. First, I'd like to welcome our newest Chesapeake chapter members. They are Luke Fraza from the Dulles Area Transportation Association and Philip Dodge from the Downtown Columbia Partnership. And next up, just a quick second for my shameless membership plug. I'll just take a minute to remind everyone that as an ACT member, your benefits include networking with TDM professionals locally, regionally, and nationally, learning from industry leaders, shaping policies that impact TDM, increasing the visibility of your organization nationally, and growing yourself professionally. So if you value your Chesapeake chapter membership or your ACT membership, please consider expanding the number of ACT members within your own organization and or friends and colleagues who work in transit or transit adjacent industries about the benefits of being an ACT member and recommend that they join the fun. It's easy to find the membership tab on the ACT website, and once there, it's even easier to click on join or renew. And if you've got any questions, please reach out to me. The best way is at hmorello@omniride.com. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Holly. So let me introduce, we have two speakers today. The first one is Anna Walters, and she's been a bike consultant and events community manager with Bikes Make Life Better for the past 4 years. The focus of her work is to develop bike culture communities within large and fast-growing companies. She's designed and implemented bike-friendly businesses for LinkedIn, Stanford University, Uber, and Walmart. She has expertise in research analysis and writing about bike trends and bike practices, particularly in the corporate space. Prior to joining Bikes Make Life Better, Anna was the transportation specialist at Google. She lives in San Francisco, car-free, using her bike and public transit throughout the Bay Area. And of course, she knows firsthand what it takes to get employees out of cars and into bikes. Our second presenter will be Jessica Roberts. Jessica is a principal consultant at Alta Planning and Design, leading a TDM team that designs, implements, and evaluates transportation behavior change campaigns. She's known as the founder of the fastest growing behavioral TDM movement, which is building bridges between behavioral scientists and TDM professionals. Her work in the arena is creating more effective TDM programs that are based on evidence theory and that are evaluated rigorously to determine the mode shift impact of individual program variables. So Anna, do you want to go ahead and take it away and share your screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for that introduction. I must say I'm really excited to be sharing the stage with Jessica from Alta, huge fan, so this is great. Let me pull up my presentation and y'all let me know if something doesn't seem right or You can't see it, but is everyone good? All right, cool. So yeah, once again, my name's Anna. My job really is just to get more butts on bikes. That's what we do at Bikes Make Life Better. So for this presentation though, we're gonna focus on the current situation. We're in the midst of pandemic, so how do we engage people when they're sheltering in place at home and not necessarily at the office? And then what can we do to prepare people to bike back to work when some of our workforce starts going back in again? So let's see, I'm gonna start my clock. All right, so why now? I feel like we're in the middle of an amazing bike renaissance. Never have we had this kind of an opportunity. And I hate to call it an opportunity just because we are in the middle of kind of a crazy, terrible time. But really, we have millions of trips that are temporarily up for grabs across the globe. And this is really exceedingly rare. I'm trying to think of another time that bikes were this big. And I want to go back to like the 1890s, but maybe, the oil crisis of the 70s. So everyone is biking now. Bikes are actually cool. So we really need to try and capitalize on this moment that we have right now. So just to get a little bit more into engagement, why now? We have a captive audience. Life, as we know it, has moved online. As much as I detest that for Zoom happy hours and social engagements, it has actually been really great for engagement. So I work with a number of big clients in the Bay Area, typically are on the West Coast, and they've actually seen engagement is way up, with their online classes and some of their virtual offerings. I actually just hosted a webinar this morning, which talked about Facebook's virtual bike program. And from Q2 last year to Q2 this year, they're seeing double participation in their online classes. And just as another example, I used to run a virtual webinar for another client in the summer of last year. We had about 3 to 5 people join every time. It was just a Bike 101 class. Now we have 60 and above, mostly for our classes. So really there's more eyeballs on your content right now. More people are opening your newsletters, and now is really a good time to tell your bike story. This one is a little less true right now, but especially in the beginning, of the spring, March, April, May, we were experiencing increased road safety. So many cities, across the country, across the globe, were closing streets down to cars and making them pedestrian and bike only. So that was great for people that had just gotten their bike out of their garage and were a little tepid about riding with traffic. It meant that they generally had a safe place around them that they could go and kind of practice riding and get the hang of it again. We're not really seeing as much of this now. People are starting to go back to work, things are opening up. Doesn't really seem like that in the Bay Area, honestly. I feel like the rest of the country is partying without me, which is okay. But yeah, cities are starting to rethink the prioritization they've been giving to cars and kind of starting to put people first, or I'm seeing that in some of the regions I follow. So it's a great time to encourage people to try biking, just because you do have some of those added safety features and that sort of fear of traffic barriers removed for people. Just to set the stage a little bit for what we're experiencing right now, we're seeing huge increases in ridership. So there's a company called EcoCounter that make ways to count cyclists as they pass by a certain location. You might have seen them in your cities. They're basically these vertical towers, electronic towers that count cyclists as they pass by. And from March to mid-June, there was a 21% increase compared to the same time frame in 2019. So that's a really big increase. In the bike industry, we get excited about like a 0.5% increase in ridership. At our companies, if 10% of cyclists are riding, that's huge, but usually it's more like 3%. So 21% increase is really great. We're also seeing a huge uptick in bike sales. And if you visited a bike shop, you might know what I'm talking about. If you're trying to buy a bike right now, get ready for a wait, unfortunately. We're really backed up, especially given constraints with bikes coming from overseas, China and stuff like that. But just to give you a sense of what we're doing, sales are about 1.1 billion for June, and that's kind of similar over the last couple months. Typical sales are somewhere around 500 million, so a huge increase in bike sales right now. And then what kind of riders are we seeing? This is a great graph from our friends at Love to Ride. They're a ride tracking platform, and they do a lot of bike challenges across the country. So they did a survey. It was about 10,000 people worldwide. 5,000 of those people were in the United States. And it just asked people how often they were riding compared to this time last year. And what the survey found was that 44% of new riders report riding more often compared to last year. So really that's the cohort we're trying to target right now with our programs, is the new riders, the people that, you know, weren't commuting by bike before, weren't even like really riding, but now that they had an opportunity to get their bike out and on the road again, they did. We also saw that 45% of occasional riders were riding more often. So those are really kind of the two groups we need to really target with messaging. Unfortunately, people that were riding regularly are reported riding less often. And I've definitely seen that. I fall in that category too. But it's okay. I want to cede the space to the new riders, because the more people we get biking, really, the more the movement grows, and the more we'll see positive change in that arena. The other thing we have to do is prepare for the SOV burden. We're already seeing an uptick in traffic in many of our cities. In some cases, you know, I was reading like cities in China are even like 20% above what normal levels would be for a time, regular times. So yeah, we're gonna unfortunately see a lot of movement away from transit, shuttles, carpools, things that don't like feel safe, to modes that feel more safe. And we just, you know, have to prepare for that. But luckily, bikes are a really great option. You can social distance on bikes. They're outdoors, so the ventilation is great. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that we can really plug when it comes to bikes. Okay, so how do we go about engagement? Well, during this time, I was, you know, especially in the spring, I was doing a lot of special newsletters and kind of dispatches from the bike world. I upped my the frequency to about twice a month instead of monthly. And that was just because we had so much content. We had so much going on, and we still have so much going on. I usually do a virtual roundup that lists bike events that are happening in the webinar format from bike coalitions across the country. And that was really cool. We had people engaging a lot more with us via just newsletters. There's also a lot of virtual classes and events you can start doing. And so this is just a list here, but some of our clients were doing one-on-one video consultations, and these are at well-resourced clients, so you might not have the bandwidth to do this, but we've just found that this has been really personally heartwarming. I just learned that one of our bike coordinators taught someone actually how to ride a bike over VC. So total newbie, like didn't know how to pedal, so like had to take the pedals off and lower the seat, to like fully riding and pedaling by the end of a couple sessions. So I just, you know, that just goes to show that you really can make an impact even if you're not in person. We've also been doing a lot of live demos, classes, Q&As, happy hours, just trying to make sure people have the tools they need. Like if they don't know how to, you know, fix a flat, or they are looking to buy a bike. We've been running tons of bike buying webinars actually right now, because everyone's looking for bikes, and the world of bikes is very complex. So it's actually a very personal choice. One thing that I must say, I'm kind of a Luddite in every way. It's kind of funny that I work with so much tech, but we started running social Zwift rides at Facebook, our biggest client. And I was kind of a naysayer about this, but it's actually hugely popular. So Zwift rides are virtual bike rides. So you get a little avatar and you can bike, you know, all over the globe, from like a segment of the Tour de France to like somewhere in your backyard, like Napa Valley for us. And it's just incredibly popular. People get trainers, they bike indoors, they feel safe, and then they can connect to this global community of cyclists, which is something that we weren't seeing before. So in a lot of ways, our reach is even extended out towards just our local bike community, which is really nice. We also really like pre-recorded educational videos. So there's lots of great content out there. Some are better than others. We really like the League of American Bicyclists for any sort of programming. And then Park Tool is the gold standard for how to fix your bike. So we've been sending a lot of those out to different groups. One thing you can do for your constituents right now is mobile bike repair. And this is important because bike shops are just so backed up. I tried to get a bike in to replace a wheel set, and it was like four months or something out, which is just a little crazy. So in the Bay Area, we have a mobile bike repair vendor called VeloFix, And they go out, they can make house calls that can be contactless, so it's really safe. We also have them actually physically come to a location, and we invite employees from our different clients to drop off their bike for a free fix. And they have to book a time slot, so there's no crowding risk or anything like that. Also, of course, PPE, sanitizing the bikes, everything like that. But we found these have been hugely popular right now just because there is such a lack of mechanics time out there. So that's something you can do if you have the resources in your area. Other thing for engagement that we've been trying to do is just targeting the commute shed. And that is something that we do anyway. But right now we have a cohort of new riders. So at some of our clients, we're able to identify who the new riders are because they have commute tracking platforms, and they're allowed to track their regular rides for fitness reasons. So we can see like who's never engaged with our program before and who is engaging now. And then we can cross-reference that with their address and sort of like target them if they're living within 10 miles of work when they actually start biking back to work. So that hasn't happened yet at our clients, and we're not exactly sure what that rollout is going to look like, but we are prepared to use targeted communication for that cohort. And then the other thing, I always like to find the fun in biking and the weirdness. That might just be me. I'm from the Bay Area, so not sure what the East Coast culture is like, but there's just a lot of great videos and stuff out there that you can send out as like a part of a fun program. So we really like Stephen Colbert changes a bike too. He's a funny guy. He was just doing it himself with some like interesting tools. There's also just this mountain bike dude who does funny videos like tricks in his own gym, or he does Danny Daycare where he takes a child who's obviously not a child and does like loop-de-loops through a mountain bike course. So if you can just find things that are like day brightening, sometimes that can really help. And then just to like kind of continue the engagement in little nudges anywhere you can. You can try and find the fun, but also try and find the utility. Try and just be the most helpful you can to your employees and constituents. So if they're going to start riding back to work, encourage them to test ride the route to work. You can even send them a route. You can offer to ride it in a safe way with them. I've done all of those things, and honestly, that really does move the needle, kind of that like personal touch. Create challenges. I know a lot of people have been doing these already, so I won't spend too much time on that. My favorite thing to do is to give people adventures or missions. So give them something fun, give them a fun destination, especially if it's something they can do with the whole family. I like to check like Atlas Obscura and see where the weird things are in my area. So like particularly on this slide, there's a mini post office inside a tree inside a park. And so that's like kind of a fun destination to send them to. Photo contests also work. Geocaching, which is where you use GPS coordinates to find a buried treasure, not necessarily buried, but hidden. Yeah, so find the fun point and send them there. The other thing is really encourage family rides or household rides, just a way to socialize with people in your house. Kids are also, well, they're back at school now, but during the summertime, it was especially important to get them out. So I've been sending people a lot of family riding guides and answering lots of questions about how do I ride with kids? It's actually something I don't know about, so it was fun to learn. And then just offering advanced education as needed. So a lot of people are moving from the like trying it phase to the, oh, I need to learn more. I got a flat the other day and I didn't know how to fix it. So just making sure you understand kind of where your people are at in their journey is really helpful. So this slide just has resources. I'll send these out later, or Tracy will send these out later so you can check them out. Okay, and then how do we get ready to bike back to work when we do that? We've been talking about this moment with our clients, and the thing that we're hearing a lot is celebrate your commuters, even if it's in a really small way. So we have one client, LinkedIn, they're not back to work yet, but when they actually have employees go back to work, those that record a ride during their first week get entered into a drawing to win an e-bike, which is a pretty generous gift. If you don't have those kinds of resources, even just a card at your desk congratulating you and then offering you links to other resources or ways to engage with the bike community. A lot of times these are people that didn't know how to bike before or weren't biking, so they're totally brand new to the like fun bike community that you have at your office. The other way, if you have the means, is to start a bike loaner program. This helps target the people that are thinking about a new mode when they come back to work, but maybe didn't start biking during the pandemic, and now they have a barrier of not having a bike. We have a lot of loaner programs going at different clients, and they're really successful. Usually there's a huge waiting list to get in. And then there's checks you have to make sure people are actually using the bikes for the commute. This program, I'm not exactly sure which client this is, but they also have scooters. So scooters are also a very hot COVID approved way to get around. Yeah, again, it's an idea. This is just a link to our corporate bike program best practices. And again, it's just something you can peruse on your own time. I want to make sure that we get through everything in the 20 minutes. Oh yeah, so some more resources. I threw in the your business casual attire is destroying the planet, kind of a fun one, but okay. And so like, how do we think about our facilities, the actual spaces where our cyclists are going to be going when people get back to work? And you might not be at this phase yet, but it actually is great to think ahead. So the first thing to think about is your bike parking. So this is really important to the bike experience. If you arrive at work as a new cyclist and you don't have anywhere to put your bike and you're not sure where to go, like it just turns it from like a positive experience to a negative experience, and then they're just not going to do it again. So it's really time to take stock of your bike facilities, see what you have, and make sure that you have a correct ratio to support the cyclists that you will have coming back to work, and also look at just the experience in general and make sure that it's good. Do I feel safe parking my bike here? Is it a pain in the butt to get from like the corner of the garage parking lot all the way across campus to my desk? Like just try and think through what that process looks like generally. Okay, and so when you're thinking about how do I make sure everyone's safe in a time of a scary virus, you really have to become like a mini transportation or transit or traffic engineer. So you have to look at sort of what's the flow throughout your space, you know, outdoor to indoor, indoor to bike room to locker room to eventual desk, kind of what that whole flow looks like. And then kind of fix the problematic points. So, so study the routes in, make sure that there's no choke points or blind corners or places where people are going to collide in a way that you know, feels unsafe. And a lot of it is, I mean, I like to say perception is reality. So even just like putting in, you know, different infrastructure or blocking off some routes so that you have kind of a one-way track around to your bike facility and then out, that can just make people feel better. Look at your racks. So make sure your racks are spaced 6 feet apart. Just kind of consider how they're configured. This picture shows someone going through a hallway crowded with bikes. Probably not a great idea in this time. I mean, it's a great solution for the space constrained office place for sure. The other thing to think about is to look at your wayfinding. So whether that's actual like paint on the ground or like tape on the ground that shows the flow, to shows the spacing, to instructions on the racks that kind of give like what the protocol is, like maybe give the bike between you and the next one 6 feet, or you know, basically anything that is related to how you're handling the pandemic and bike parking as an office is helpful, including cleaning. So cleaning schedules, if you can post that in your bike room, that's actually really helpful and helps people feel safe. Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about circulation. One-way paths are great. You can try and phase commuters into spaces, and this might be a little annoying, but maybe if it's a badge access space, there's like a wait delay period before it the next person is allowed to enter. So that could be good. Locker rooms and showers. We get a lot of questions about this, and honestly, if you're interested, we have a back to work safety guidelines PDF that goes into like gross detail about everything from like toilets to showers to like materials. So just kind of follow the same guidance. So generally for finding and analyzing your bike routes, you know, 6 feet of distance, interval strategy is good. Cleaning, obviously very important. And then PPE, make sure everyone is wearing masks. Just, you know, decide what makes sense and what's appropriate. Obviously, CDC guidelines are critical. Then this picture shows a locker room of yore. Probably not gonna have people hanging out reading magazines or crowded around the benches anymore, but it's okay. There's a lot of temporary bike parking solutions too. So this was just an unused room in a parking garage where you can put temporary racks and make it really easy for people to social distance. It's kind of a wide open space. We're also seeing outdoor bike rooms. So fully built out kind of cages that feel really safe and are outdoors. And those can be put kind of wherever you have space. So the ventilation is great outside. We know that. We make them badge access, and there's things that don't even look that temporary, that look kind of pretty and permanent, and could be permanent if you're looking for that sort of solution. And then finally, what do you do as a traffic engineer? You analyze the data, you make sure that you're reviewing like how users are navigating the space, and then you make adjustments. So sort of identifying any efficiency issues, and then also reaching out to new users, those who haven't been using bike parking ever, making sure they know kind of the drill and feel good about the experience. But anyway, I think I'm right on time. That is the end of my presentation, and I'll be around for questions if anyone has them. I'm not sure if we want to take them now or at the end.
We're going to take the questions at the end.
Cool.
Jessica, you are up next.
Great. Let me try to share the screen, make sure it works. Alrighty, you can all see my cover slide? Yeah? All right, great, let's get started, everybody. I'll turn my stopwatch on too, following Anna's good example. I don't want to keep you late. I really enjoyed hearing Anna's perspective. I'll refer back to that a couple of times. I'm going to broaden us out and talk about all modes. So we'll talk about behavioral science, TDM, and of course, everything we talk about these days, we talk about what does this have to do with COVID. So what we'll cover today is I'll define behavioral TDM. That seems only fair. I will tell you what research to date has taught us. I will talk about habit formation and disruption, and then we'll talk about some promising new directions for research. So first of all, what is behavioral TDM? So this approach is trying to reduce drive-alone trips by building TDM programs that are based on behavioral science principles and evidence. And behavioral science is a hybrid field that brings together psychology and economics to understand how people actually make decisions, especially when those decisions seem irrational and or are causing harm to people and the planet. And it's a very fast-moving or fast-growing area of interest. So you're all part of it now, having attended this webinar. And I have lots of resources for you beyond what we talk about today. So if you're jazzed by this, let me know and I'll send you a bunch of links. So let's start with the world's fastest lit review. After this, it took me a long time to get here. So after this, you'll know a lot of what there is to know based on research. So one thing we know is that financial incentives and non-financial incentives can change when people travel, what mode they pick, and it can reduce parking use. Which presumably means people weren't driving, but the study didn't seek to answer that. Maybe they were stealthing in the neighborhood. We know that personalized trip plans can change people's travel mode choice. There's a lot of evidence on this. We'll talk about some advancement of that research later. We know that people have an irrational response to things that are free. By irrational response, I mean they consume those in quantities that may be irrational, and also are very attached to them. So if you think about the amount of time of people's lives they give up waiting in line for the annual Ben & Jerry's free ice cream day, that might be a good example. This, unfortunately, in North America acts against us more often than not because so much parking is free, and you can see that irrational response when we threaten to start charging them for their private vehicle storage in the public right-of-way. They get a little bit emotional. But it can work in our best interest if we are offering people, for example, transit passes to employees at no cost to them. We see that then they feel really invested in using them. We also know that people consume more of things if they pay upfront for unlimited access versus paying as they go. And the research on this that I'm looking to is both about parking, going from bundled, let's say you pay by the quarter or by the year, to paying every day. And also research on car sharing. So when people go from bundled outright auto ownership to paying per use, they use less of it. excuse me, we know that habit disruption can lead to changes in how people get around. And we also know that there are certain interventions that are specifically designed to get to kind of like intervene in the habitual driving, in this case, the habit, and get people to reflect on their choices in a more deliberate way. So there are like strategies to stimulate deliberate choice making, as well as action planning, coping planning, and implementation planning, and we'll cover some of that later. And then also, I want to model for you being a good consumer of science. And so I don't just want to tell you about the research that supports the things that I believe or that I want to believe. I do want to admit to you that there is some really, really high quality research out there with thoughtful TDM program interventions that did not have an impact on people's driving behavior. And then there's even more research out there that basically, at the end of the day, they kind of throw their hands up and say, well, the state of the research makes it really hard to draw conclusions. They might say things like there's limited evidence or there's inconclusive evidence. And part of that is because we all know it's very difficult to directly observe people's travel behavior. You know, all of the work we do for a single, let's say, annual mode choice survey at an employer, and even that, like, it's not great data. So it's just hard to observe whether what we do has an impact. We can have a whole nother presentation about how luckily technology is changing that a bit. But so what I take away from this is not like TDM doesn't work or behavioral approaches to TDM are garbage. I think what it tells us is it's hard to do good research, but we should try. I think it tells us that some of what we're doing today that we haven't evaluated isn't working. And that can be really hard for us to acknowledge, but it's definitely true. If we're not evaluating what we're doing, then some of what we do probably is not working. And I'd love to see all of us in TDM really embrace that as good news if we find it out, because we can stop spending money on that and put those resources to things that we know do work. And I think it also means that we need to learn more about the contexts in which behavioral approaches to TDM can actually work. So for example, you know, if you've got free unlimited parking at an employer and a very, very strong driving culture at that organization, probably sending a single email where we A/B tested the subject line to use, I don't know, loss aversion, I'll show you that later. It's not going to transform everything overnight. So I think, you know, it's like, when is this the right tool at the right time to make a difference? Okay, as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about habits. The short version is habits are easier to make than they are to break. And what a habit is a learned sequence that has become automatic through repetition. And that sequence has three parts. There's the stimulus, or sometimes called the context, which leads us to take an action for which we get a reward. In the context of commuting, the reward doesn't literally have to be like, you know, a bar of candy or like $100 bill. It can just be, I got to work in an amount of time and for an amount of money that was comfortable to me, and my commuting didn't challenge my identity or my comfort in any way. And then the more you repeat this, the more automatic it becomes, and the more the neural pathways just sort of take over on autopilot. So it's really important to consider all three parts of habit, because I think in TDM, we focus a lot of energy on the action part and just like want to talk to people about like, pick a different mode. But I think we could do more to acknowledge, well, what's the context that's starting this automatic reaction? And then what's the reward? And one thing also that's very important to note is that people may want to make a change. They may want to do a different action. But as long as the stimulus and the reward stay fixed, they're very unlikely to succeed in getting there. And that's especially the case where the habit is easy or pleasurable, and the desired change would force them to experience some kind of discomfort or sacrifice. And unfortunately, I think that is an accurate way to describe, you know, a lot of people's experience in trying something other than driving to work in the US context. At least the first time, right? So let's think about how we can disrupt all three parts of this. So disrupting the stimulus or the context, the most kind of no-duh moment for that is when people change homes or change office locations. There's a lot of research on this. If you want to know more, I can share the studies with you. And it happens all the time, right? People move homes, people move offices. So we could do a lot with that. Also, as an example, if people experience a new kind of, let's say, health limitation, blindness runs in my family. And so I've had multiple family members who have had to give up their driver's licenses, right? Well, that forms suddenly a very different decision-making context. Or, I mean, just a totally fictional, ludicrous example of a global pandemic is leading everyone's offices to be closed. I mean, if that ever happened, that would be hilarious. But, you know, you'd see a lot of habits change overnight if that were to happen. And then looking at disrupting the action, part of habits. Well, sometimes your habitual option is literally unavailable to you. So let's say you normally drive to work, but the freeway's closed for construction, or there's a bridge out, or maybe there's a big traffic crash that's snarling traffic. Or if you usually drive, your car breaks down. Well, you can't do your autopilot drive to work if your car just doesn't work. Or if you usually take the bus and maybe the transit agency changed the route, right? So if you can't do your habit, then you suddenly are back in that deliberate choice making of like, oh, how should I get to work? How do I want to get to work? What works for me? And then finally, super important, looking at the reward part. So if parking used to be free and now I have to pay for it, that is likely to disrupt my habit. Or maybe the drive to work used to be really fast and easy, but now congestion has made it slower to a point where it's maybe intolerable to me or just not feeling like it's working. So as TDM professionals, we can productively focus on any or all parts of this. But I think a lot of it is some of these we can bring into existence. So in particular, focusing on the reward part, if we work in an employer context, we might be able to change those things. And we didn't talk, I mean, you can increase the reward for other modes, right? But a lot of this, I think, is responding to opportunities and looking for them. So if there is going to be some big traffic planned, construction, freeway closure or something, like swoop in, take full advantage of that and try to change people's habits. And then also really looking at when people change homes and jobs. There were one thing I would like everyone in the TDM industry to do. It's to like rewire our programs to take full advantage of that opportunity. Okay. And then as promised, the last part of the presentation will be covering some promising specific interventions, to use, science talk. I know that's like kind of an awkward term, but I think it's important that I make clear that these are pretty modular strategies. This isn't like an entire program, right? So you can take a lot of what I'm about to cover and like insert it into programs that you already have. So the first one is personalization. That builds on the research I already told you about, that personalized trip plans can affect people's mode. And this research and the next one I'm going to cover, a study was done by the Center for Advanced Hindsight, very funny name, at Duke University. They're my very frequent collaborators, and I want to acknowledge their work. I advised this, but they did it. So they said, great. Those personalized trip plan studies were pretty expensive the trip plans were really expensive to generate, and they took a lot of time. Could we make it cheaper and still get the same impact? So they did two studies. One was with City of Durham employees, and the next was with North Carolina Central University students. And in both cases, they had HR databases that knew where people lived, and they know where they're going. They know where the city office is, and they know where the university is. So they just built a little script and ended up picking the best fit non-drive alone option. And then they made it pretty and emailed everyone individually and said, hey, Jessica, we know driving's super stressful for you, or we know the commute can be stressful. So we wanted to be helpful, and check it out. We found your best commute. Now, I would not necessarily have thought that this was transformative. This is unsolicited information. People didn't indicate that they wanted it. And they're not getting anything they couldn't get at any point by going to Google Maps and putting in this information, right? However, it actually had a pretty big impact. I mean, in the context of TDM, I think you'll agree, these are like wow figures. So for the city employees, they found over 9% reduction in drive alone trips among people in the treatment groups. And then at North Carolina Central, they found over 7% reduction. In this case, it was with students. It's a slightly more suburban context, so I'm not surprised the impact is lower, but it's still pretty impressive. And we think the mechanism at work here is twofold. One is personalization. So it was addressed to people individually by name, and it had been created just for them. That tends to make things more salient, meaning it gets their attention. So maybe they wouldn't just delete the email unread, and maybe they'd pay more attention to what's in it. And then relatedly, when someone does something for you, subconsciously, you may feel more like you need to do something for them. Like when, you know, Amnesty International sends you the return address labels, right? So it may be that people felt like, oh, they did all this work for me. Maybe I should at least give it a try. All right, next we're going to talk about a little bit about framing. So meaning we don't change anything about the options, we just change how we communicate about them. And this was a study, it's called a lab study, and it was done using Mechanical Turk, which is an online survey, paid survey taking service. And over 800 participants were shown, they were given a fictional commute, suburban to urban, and then they were shown their commute options and for this fictional trip, and then asked to pick which mode they would take to get to work. And the 6 conditions were, the control was pretty much what you see in every trip planning app, which is they were shown their options ranked by time, shortest first, which puts driving alone usually at the top. The next, very simple, and this is where like behavioral scientists come in, because I would literally have never thought to test this. They just flipped the order. They showed it ranked by time slowest first. So walking was at the top and driving was at the bottom. And then the other 4 conditions were just layering in cost in one, carbon emissions in another, calories in a third, and we tried to do productivity for the 4th, and it ended up being really complicated. So I think that was a bust. They all, everything but the control, led to people saying they would pick a non-drive alone mode more often, you know, within statistical significance. And the heavy lifter here was actually the reverse order, to my surprise. And then among those, everything else had a further positive impact, but within the error bars, except for emissions, so the environmental one. Now, this is what's called stated intention data. Do not take this to the bank and try to cash it. Like, people are very bad at knowing really what they'll do, but it's still preliminary data that's based on more than just guessing or more than just like a survey that can lead us to stronger hypotheses that we can then test in the field. So some of this information is currently being tested in a parking pricing study at Vanderbilt University. But I think this proves the basic concept that how we present information on commute modes can influence people's understanding of it and how appealing they find it. So as with any science, the true finding is more research is needed, but more research is needed. And then the third thing we'll talk about is called a commuter commitment. So this is in the context of this great award-winning program at the city of Austin that we didn't create, the city did, where employees can earn additional paid days off by arriving at work, not driving alone. But there are people who sign up for that program and then never make a change in their behavior, which is pretty provocative. They wanted it enough, they signed up, but they kind of didn't get around to sealing the deal. So this commuter commitment is a bundling of several different, very evidence-supported ideas in one. And so the first one is visualization. So in this case, how are you going to spend those 2 days off? And how are you going to feel when you do it? So, you know, someone's like, I'm going to go to the beach with my dog, and I'm going to have a wine, you know, in my hand, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to just feel so peaceful and happy. And suddenly they're pretty invested in that outcome emotionally. Next is planning. So this is just a very practical exercise, but you kind of pre-game it, like literally, how are you going to do it? What route are you going to take? Do you need to get any gear? Who are you going to do this with? How long will it take? And as a part of that, also coping planning, what barriers might arise and how could you overcome them? So this is like pre-game troubleshooting, right? And then finally wrapping that all up into making a specific measurable commitment, and making that commitment, they had to agree that it would be shared publicly with their colleagues and that they could receive feedback on it. Now, we were going to do the test in March. Some things happened in March. So we only had a week of data, which is super disappointing. But even in that week of data, very, very, very preliminary, but even in that week, people who signed the commitment did in fact take more alternative trips than others. So we hope to be able to keep testing this once things get a little more normal. Next, we're going to talk about loss aversion. And that's the idea that people, whatever pleasure they derive from receiving something, they experience more than that displeasure when it gets taken away from them. So I know this is a little fuzzy. I'm sorry. I'll read the important parts to you, but this is a program that Behavioral Insights team did with the city of San Jose, California, where city employees could get a free transit pass. And instead of just saying, here are the benefits, like, here's why you should do it, here's why it's great, they really tried to stimulate that sense of like, you are missing out. And so they said things like, you've been missing out on free transit rides, you're already enrolled, and don't let the $770 value go to waste. And they ended up seeing 11 times more city employees sign up for the program because of this email, which is a pretty big effect. I don't think I'd always promise that, but it's certainly exciting. And then, you know, in the interest of time, I might rush through this. This is Fresh Start is just getting at this idea I talked about already in the habit formation, that when people, well, in this case, move homes, they're more open to change. Their habits aren't fixed, in fact. So they're more open to trying new things or following through on sort of vague intentions they have. So this was a study in the city of Portland, again, from Behavioral Insights team, that offered trial, like a first ride free kind of thing for a bike share system. And people who had recently moved homes were 4 times more likely to take them up on the offer. And then in terms of COVID, I think I want to emphasize 2 groups of people. One is the people who are doing what we want them to do now, and they weren't before, and we want them to keep doing that. So that's people who are now biking and walking more than they used to. Probably not for work commutes, right? But they're doing it. And also teleworkers, right? So we want them to continue doing those things. And I loved so much of what Anna said. I think exactly what she talked about are the kinds of ways that we can help people build stronger habits around cycling and help them start to connect their personal, like recreational exercise cycling trips to a commute mindset. That can help make that habit durable, even as things do change when we start to come back to the office. And for teleworking, I think there are things we can do to make the teleworking experience just be better for people, help them thrive and feel in control of that situation. So in fact, there's a webinar happening like literally right now from Center for Transportation on this topic. None of us on this call could attend it, but it will be recorded. And I encourage us all to take a look at it to, help people get more invested in teleworking and not feel like, oh, I can't wait to stop doing this. And then the other group, unfortunately, are all those people who used to take transit and carpool who have shifted to drive alone. So for these folks, I suggest actually that we're going to want to stimulate a sense of fresh start as much as possible, because otherwise their new habits will persist when they start to go back to the workplace. So we're going to have to be careful about when and how we say that, because we don't want to like go against public health or like actual factual, concerns. But at some point being able to say, hey, we're coming back to the workplace, everything's so different than it used to be. We're here to help you plan your best commute, or, something along those lines of like, break with the past, let's move forward together. We're here to help. Yes, good. That's my last slide, because I want to make sure we have a little time for questions.
Okay.
Do you want me to stop sharing the screen, Emily?
You can leave it up. That's fine.
Okay.
Let's see. One of the questions for Jessica, how do we help people feel safe on transit from a behavioral standpoint?
Yeah, this is a super, super, super hot topic. There isn't any research I'm aware of yet that has tackled this. It's so new, but there are 2 studies going on, one in San Francisco and one in British Columbia, that are trying to get at exactly this. So part of my squirrely answer is, let's find out what they say. But some of the ideas we have are, for one thing, really educating ourselves about, emerging data on real risk. there's at least some like headline level findings that public transit may actually be lower risk than we all think it is. Then there's how we present that, but we have to be confident first, right? So definitely keeping up on what our transit agency is doing. There's also a concept called operational transparency, which is from the public agency perspective. I don't know if any of us here work for the transit agencies, so I don't know if we have control over this, but the more that transit agencies and others can just be really honest and upfront about like, here's what we're doing and why, rather than just being like, trust us, will help to build people's confidence. I think that also as social norms, especially within like, work organizations, you can build on those. So as people start to take transit and carpool again, you can point to those people as social proof that like we feel comfortable doing that. But yeah, I think this is something that scares me a lot. And I think there are things we can do, but I think it's going to be hard. And I look forward to continuing to talk about it because it's important.
Okay, good. The next one, let's see. To Anna, has telework negatively affected biking at all?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And right now we're in the wait and see phase, kind of like Jessica's answer about transit. We don't really have employees back at any of our clients right now in great numbers. So our programs are funded by trip caps that a lot of these employers are under. So they need to reduce the amount of, SOVs that are coming into their campuses. These are really big tech companies, like Facebook has a sprawling campus. And right now, they're totally meeting their trip caps because no one's actually driving to work. So right now, luckily we live in an area that does prioritize biking culturally. Our governor just declared that he was going to phase out gas-powered cars by 2035. So there is like an impetus there to keep this up. And honestly, all of our clients have been supportive in maintaining these virtual programs during this time because they do see the importance environmentally to getting cars off the road. So we haven't exactly seen a negative impact yet. I'm not sure if it's in the mail, but trip caps do govern a lot of our programs and our funding. So it's a great question.
Okay, let's see. Brandon had asked, I read an article where consumers are buying up used cars to curb public transit usage. Have you seen this behavior in your area, and what are some ways to address it? And that's pretty much anyone can answer that. So if you want to answer, you can unmute. Anyone?
So to make sure I understand, you're saying people are buying cars because they don't want to take transit?
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to know something tragic? Me. I've never owned a car in my whole life. I bought one 3 weeks ago because we can't ride the damn bus.
No.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I've used it like 3 times, but not that that's a total excuse, but yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of us are concerned about the transit death spiral. The funding crises that are coming along with the ridership plummeting may lead to cuts in frequency, span, and routes, which then make transit a worse proposition. So, I mean, part of this is an advocacy answer, like anything any of us can do, whatever our role is, to defend, maintain, expand transit funding, have the long view, really make sure to tell the story about how our communities and cities cannot survive if everyone who used to take transit gets in a drive alone, gets in a car. I mean, even just from a literal space perspective, it doesn't work. And so acknowledging that early and trying to get out ahead of it, which won't be easy, but I think it's really important. And there's a wonderful article that Jarrett Walker wrote for some national outlet. I'll look it up and paste it in the comments, but it makes me actually teary every time I read it. It's about how, like, it turns out public transit was actually the fabric that holds civilization together. And now we know. So I think sharing that article and others like it are going to be really, really important.
Okay. Do we have, let's see. To Jessica, what does research say is the best way to market alternative modes? Social media, events, anything else?
There's no research on this. I wish there were. Yeah. I mean, I think we could we could test some of these things, but probably my pragmatic, just like TDM practitioner answer is, we usually, if we can afford to, try to sort of do everything as like insurance. And I think that, well, I don't know, we could really rabbit hole on this. It depends on if it's an employer program or like a residential program, sort of like what your options are. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. Going. Okay. So this presentation is being recorded and it will be posted on our chapter webpage in the next day or two. I want to thank Jessica and Anna for coming to present with us, and everyone, I thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties, and look out for an email from us next week speaking about all the announcements that we had at the beginning of the presentation. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.